You did not necessarily resign of your own accord, but you were asked to resign. You weren't kicked off, but you were asked to resign. When you got that initial communication, what went through you? Like, what were you thinking? How were you feeling about that?
I was greatly disappointed.
Hey YouTube, it's Pastor Dwayne here. Today we have Dr. Dan Haifley with us, and he was with the King James Bible Research Council, and he is no longer. And so he's here to share with us some of the things that have happened in regards to that. So, Dr. Dan Haifley, why don't you go ahead and say hello to everybody?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for your interest in this subject.
Part of why I wanted to bring you on is I wanted to, one, clarify your position and then find out what happened with the King James Bible Research Council, because I think it was on a New King James Version Bridge Bible video by the KJBRC where you had posted a comment and said you were no longer with the King James Bible Research Council. So let's start there. How come you're no longer part of the King James Bible Research Council?
Well, without going into all of too many details, I felt like, first of all, post Mark Ward debate, there was a lot of backlash from the debate and the way I conducted myself and how I presented myself. And the KJBRC is a group of guys that have different opinions. And so I was up there saying things that I believe and, going from my perspective. And some of the other people on the council would disagree with that. And we're okay with that in our meetings and so on, because we just present our ideas and our things. But there was a whole bunch of backlash, and people were trying to say, well, Haifley's representing KJBRC, so does KJBRC believe all the things he believes? Well, some people liked that and some people didn't like that. And then on the board, there were people that were answering to their crowds, and their crowds were saying, look, he's a heretic, he's a tear, he's a whatever. And so they wanted it to die down. So the leadership asked me, I was on the executive board, the leadership asked if I would resign to try to calm down everything, because they felt like it was going to destroy the whole organization, which I didn't want it to do. So I said, look, I'll resign from my position on the board. I'd like to stay connected to the council because I believe in what the, core values are. Because I was in on the very first meeting that we had and was involved in, I should say, crafting the doctrinal statements and so on that we had. And I felt like it reflected well my position. But in the process of time, due to the board debate and then also some of my comments in another conference that we had out in Maryland, there was getting a lot of backlash, and people were thinking that I was not a King James Bible believer, yada, whatever that meant. So the council was getting a lot of backlash. So anyway, I said, I'll step back. That's fine. And I'll just be a part of the organization from the pew or whatever. Well, in the meantime, in a board meeting that I was not at, they had decided to adopt 7 reasons, and I think those have been published, 7 reasons why they were against an update.
Right.
A couple of people. Well, I would say probably the majority of the board was in favor of it. There's a couple on the board that were not, but basically the majority won that. And so after that event, they were considering having me, after everything kind of calmed down, they were going to have me come back on the board. But in that time, I wrote a letter to them, a private letter to them, expressing my disagreements with the 7 reasons that I felt were contrary to our basic principles. And after that, some of the people in the administration felt like I was at odds with their purpose, and they removed all my videos and everything from the KJBRC site.
Right. So it's
And
almost like you've been memory holed,
oh
if
yeah,
you
it was
understand the expression from
that was a little
1984.
bit, that was a little shocking to me, because these guys, I've considered them friends, and I just get a message that we're taking all that down, sorry. And I'm like, wow. And I wanted to have an open meeting with them, and I felt
Mhm.
like I had that right as a board member to appear before them, and that didn't happen. And so they have gone their way and I've gone mine. So I don't know if that's in a nutshell, that's where we're at.
Yeah,
Uh,
let's go back to the 7 reasons why the King James Version shouldn't be updated. Now, I wasn't aware of the document, otherwise I would have had read it. But what can you summarize what the 7 reasons were and what it was about them that you disagreed with?
Reason one, there have been so many phony claims of being a KJB revision. Any such claim is met with overwhelming suspicion. This is not the time for any such project. It would not be taken seriously. So my question, or my counter to that is, I agree. There's been a lot of claims, and a lot of those claims have been bogus. And I understand the suspicion, but to say this is not the time for any such project, I have a question about that. I
Right.
believe this is the time for that project, because there's so much questions about it. There's so many people that want a good, clean update. And I question, to just say this is not the time. Who says this is not the time? And
Mhm.
how do you arrive at that decision? Reason two, there have been a few previous such projects with genuine attempts. They've all failed dramatically. There was no market for them. They didn't sell. And there are loud voices calling for a revision. Let's see. There is not a legitimate demand. Reason two, there's not a legitimate demand. And my question about that is, what constitutes a legitimate demand? This is
Mhm.
a didactic statement. I mean, just a straight out, there's no legitimate. Well, who says there's not a legitimate demand? And what does it mean to be a legitimate demand? I would say that all of the pushback we're getting, and all the people that are using multiple Bibles, and even the ESV being widely accepted now, tells us that there is a legitimate demand.
Mm.
And I have a difference of opinion about, well, let me just put it this way. A friend of mine translated the Bible into a Panamanian dialect. And one of the reasons he did, there are 25,000 people in this tribe. And so people said, why are you spending all of this time translating the Bible into a language of 25,000 people when their trade language is Spanish and they can have a Spanish Bible? And his answer was, he had them back translate for him from the Spanish into their dialect to tell him what they understood the Bible to say. And Genesis 1:1 was a great example. It said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? So
Yep.
when they back translated it through their dialect, they said, in the beginning, God created many heavens and dirt. So the concept of
Mm.
he created the heavens and the earth did not come through in their language. I've done something similar. I've tested groups of people, asking them certain problematic, or I would say even well accepted phrases that were commonly used in our cultures, in the church culture. And I've asked people that were not familiar with the language and so on to back translate or tell me what that said to them. And oftentimes they've come up with things that the text wasn't reading. They didn't
Mm.
understand what was coming through. My argument is that right now America is almost as illiterate as England was at one point. So we need to consider this. Do we need to dumb down the Bible? No, I wouldn't say that. But there needs to be an honest conversation about this. Do people really understand? Well, there's a lot of criticism. People say, one particular person says, well, bus kids understand it. Well, maybe in 1972, but do bus kids understand it today? The Bible in 1972 had not been off the public school shelves for very long. But now an entire culture, 3 generations away, they don't have any understanding of the Bible or background. So anyway, that gives you some ideas. I can go down point for point if you want me to, but
Yeah, I think just the major points are probably like the major points of disagreement. Like
yeah,
you had mentioned about the education of people
okay,
today not being up to the task. I
yeah.
think that might have been like part two or part
Yeah,
three.
reason for when he
Yeah,
said they said no one is entitled to designate themselves a scholar. Well,
right.
I take exception to that. The KJBRC is full of scholars. So if you look at the
Hmm.
definition of a scholar, what is a scholar? Well, I understand they're trying to be humble, but if you're trying to be humble, um, that's fine. But if you don't understand languages and how languages work, if you're not a speaker or someone who writes educated, articles, then
Yeah.
you're not a scholar. But if you write educated articles and you're a speaker on any given subject, you're considered to be a scholar.
Hmm.
And if you're not a scholar, then you shouldn't be dealing with the subject. If you don't know any basic rudimentary Greek or how languages work from one language to another, you really don't have the right to speak to this,
Mm,
in my opinion.
right. And that's
So
something that Mark Ward has said a number of times as well.
I agree with
So
him on that.
yeah, yeah. So you're aligning yourself with Mark Ward some more there, Dr. Dan.
Well, and that's another thing. Mark Ward has some strong opinions, and he and I actually have carried on a relationship, and I talk to him quite a bit.
Yeah.
But the truth is that I don't like how he's been branded a heretic
Mm,
just because he has a different opinion based upon his understanding. I think he has the right to have an opinion,
mm,
and he should be able to come to the table and talk about it
right.
and be honest about it. And I think that honesty has flown the coop in this discussion.
Now, if we go back to the KJBRC, to the council there, was there any, did you get the impression that anyone in there had thought this was a bad idea, that you should step aside? Did you have any supporters among the ranks?
Yes,
Okay.
simple answer.
All right. Yes. All right. We'll leave it at that. I don't want to get you into any more trouble. Now, since you have been released from the Research Council, how has your life changed since then?
Not at all, really. Um, I still do the same things. I still do research. I still do a lot of writing. Yeah, it hasn't really altered at all. Has my position changed? No, I hold the same position I did at the very beginning for the most part, I would say. I've learned new things. Let me say that. And I think anybody that doesn't learn new things, I mean, they're lying, basically. I mean, we learn new stuff. Truth can stand scrutiny, and if you study,
Mhm.
you find things that you didn't know. I've learned some things that I didn't know before. My position basically has always been this: the King James Bible is a Bible that I trust. I trust the translation. I believe those guys did a very good job. I believe it was a faithful and accurate translation of the original manuscripts, but it's a translation. I don't believe it was re-inspired. I don't believe every word in the King James Version is unmovable. I think that there are other word choices that could be used and still be right.
So does this mean that you are a Textus Receptus guy?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Uh, here's the problem we have, and I appreciate you asking that question.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I can, I'm just going to speak candidly because there's no point in beating around the bush. I think one of the problems is this whole conversation is a PR nightmare. It's very complex. And so what happens is some guys have figured some propaganda lines, and those propaganda lines have become the law of the Medes and Persians. And those propaganda lines may not be exactly accurate. Right now, for example, I'm not so sure I agree with the general idea that there are two streams of documents. I think that's a bogus statement, and I don't think it's completely accurate.
Mm.
And the truth is, I've been shocked. So David Otis Fuller was one of the guys that I grew up on, cut my teeth on his books. All right. So his book, Which Bible, he spends some time quoting Benjamin Willis, who was a
Yep.
Seventh-day Adventist, who created the whole two streams idea for the Seventh-day Adventists idea. He was trying to prove that the Seventh-day Adventists were the only true church and that they were the ones that had the true documents.
Mm.
So he created that. David Otis Fuller found his stuff and he reprinted it in his book and put Fuller's name on it. I mean, put Willis's name on it. There's a whole chapter. I don't know if you've seen it. A whole chapter that's titled "Da Da 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 Da" by Benjamin
Okay.
Willis. Okay. So anyway, but in that chapter, Fuller quotes Ellen G. White,
Oh
who was
no.
the founder, and he doesn't use her name. He says another scholar or something like that, another writer on this
Oh,
subject says this, and it's a direct quote from Ellen G. White. I found that out in the last few months because I went to find the quote, find out who it was from, and I found it in Ellen G. White's writings based on her and what Willis had come up with.
right.
I think that's disingenuous.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
Um, I don't like that at all. I've quoted that quote before, not knowing it was Ellen G. White. And that's a problem for me.
That's interesting because, one of the and I know you're not a critical text guy, neither am I.
No.
But one of the big complaints over the critical text is one, the Jesuit priests who were working on it, Carlo Martini, and then was it George Vance Smith? He was a Unitarian who was helping
Okay.
Westcott and Hort put their text together. And so many, not all, but many King James Version onlyists will claim that. And then to turn around and see that the two stream argument comes from the Seventh day Adventists, from false prophet Ellen G. White, or Ellen G. White.
Right.
I mean, that's wild. That's wild.
Yeah, and you
Now,
could check me in
I
if you
know
want.
to I don't know where the King James Bible Research Council stands on the two streams argument, but I always found that to be like a Ruckmanite kind of. So not all
Well,
KJBOs
well, Ruckman
identify.
carried it on. Ruckman also published it. KJBRC has always, and I've preached it before. Frankly, that is one thing where I've changed because, and your friend and mine, Brian Ross,
Yeah,
is one of the ones that's exposed some of that. And the fact is, what I've discovered in my research is that I personally believe, and I may be completely wrong because I didn't live in 1611,
hmm,
but I personally believe that the King James translators used the Latin Vulgate as in some cases. And the Latin Vulgate is not considered in one of the good streams. And that's because
right.
of the Seventh-day Adventists prejudiced against the Catholic Church who used the Vulgate. Well, the truth is the Latin Vulgate actually influenced our English translation. And
Right.
so to put it in the other stream tells you that something's wrong with our streams. And I found this out years ago. There was a problem because when I started looking at the Spanish edition, and we produced, I don't know if you knew this, but I sponsored or headed up a program, but we produced a Spanish Octopla, which is 8 versions of the
Oh,
Spanish
cool.
Bible side by side. You can get it. It's on the Spanish Octopla website. But the guy that edited that for me just passed away, my dear friend Steve Height.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
But
that.
that Octopla is still available, the Spanish Octopla. And it's in that we found out that the Schio version, which was the Catholic version,
Hmm.
actually altered the text, but that was pre 1881. That was in the 1700s when they started messing with the text. So if you say, well, everything ended up in 1881 with the Westcott critical text, well, that wasn't where the fox got into the henhouse. It
Right.
was long before then.
Hmm.
And I actually think that Septuagint caused some bad renderings, and possibly some of those bad renderings even got into the King James Bible, in my opinion. And when I say those kinds of things, you can see why Ruckman leaning people would get mad at me.
So let's come back to the original question.
Oh,
Um,
I'm sorry.
yeah, does that mean that you are a TR only guy?
It's just a complex question.
Yeah.
I think that God preserved his words.
Yes.
I believe that I believe that the King James Bible is a faithful and accurate representation of God's words. I think the TR was a reconstruct, the one we have anyway, from multiple, Byzantine texts, right? I would be more Byzantine, maybe you might say, more
Okay.
majority text than I would be saying TR.
Oh, interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So now, if you're gonna say majority or Byzantine, I'm gonna ask you about 1 John 5:7.
Okay.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on 1 John 5:7? Does your majority position allow that exception, or do you suggest that maybe that's not
Well,
original?
yes, because I believe the Latin is a viable document to include in the research. I
Okay,
think the
okay.
Latin brings that's why I'm saying it's a complex question. I think all of the manuscripts that have been available, and I think the King James translators, what they did to clarify, I think they used the Latin Vulgate. I think they used everything that was available to them, and they rejected like the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus, which I would reject as
Mhm.
well. And there's a couple others I would reject, 4 or 5 different manuscripts that I don't think are necessarily a stream. I think they themselves are faulty manuscripts. I wouldn't say they're in a stream because, say, the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus disagree in multiple places as well. So I
Yeah,
wouldn't say they're the same text or the same type text. Just because they're uncials doesn't mean they're both uncials and they come from Alexandria doesn't mean they're the same stream. Both of them are faulty manuscripts, and I would put them in the trash pile at the the monastery, because I don't think they're valid considerations. But
Mm.
was the Latin Vulgate a valid consideration? I think it was. I think
Okay.
it brought things to the table.
And that's interesting because the last live stream I did was actually one of my longest live streams. It was like almost 3 hours long. But I did a response video to the latest video released by the King James Bible Research Council, which was is the NKJV dangerous? I'll ask your opinion on the NKJV in a moment. But in the video, partway through, I didn't grab the timestamps or anything. You can go back and watch the
Yeah.
3 hour video if you want.
Yeah.
But in it, one of this was David Brown who was speaking, and he suggested that the Old Testament of the New King James Version was not good to follow because they used the Latin Vulgate in a number of places. And some of the issues that David Brown brought up was a question of how certain things were translated in the Vulgate. Was it to do penance instead of repent? Was one of the things that he suggested was the reason why the Vulgate was no longer something that's viable. And there were a number of other issues that he brought up. That was just one of them. And so his blanket statement was, well, the Vulgate is bad. So anyone who relies on the Vulgate is bad and corrupt and shouldn't do it. And so we can't use the New King James Version because it relies on the Vulgate. So it's just interesting that here you are saying, well, I'm good with the Vulgate, but then the King James Bible Research Council is like, well, no, if it touches the Vulgate, it's bad.
I would say that's a David Brown position, and maybe
Right.
some of the guys on the council believe that, and that's that, and they felt like my differences were so contrary to a couple of their opinions. But I would completely disagree with Dr. Brown on that,
Mm.
because I'll be honest with you, the word Lucifer in Isaiah 14, which is a big sticking point for us, and it came from the Vulgate,
Yeah.
which came from the Septuagint.
Right.
So a lot of King James guys say the Septuagint did not influence the King James. It did. It most
Mm.
definitely did. And the Latin Vulgate most definitely did, because there was no reason for Lucifer to be put in Isaiah 14. The Syriac Peshitta translated that howl at the dawn. In fact, Adam Clark said he didn't understand why the Authorized Version used the word Lucifer there, because Lucifer means day star and morning star. It means that. It means bringer of light. And why, Adam Clark said, why did the translators of the Authorized Version use the word Lucifer, bringer of light, to describe the archenemy of God? And when the Syriac Peshitta and 2 or 3 other manuscripts translated it, howl at the dawn, not bringer of the dawn. In other words, it was a contrary. The word Hallel has the idea of against the dawn, not bringing the dawn. And then, and I know this gets me in hot water. I'm doing a lot of research with it right now, but I found out that in the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth centuries, hymns were written using the word Lucifer in Latin. It was when Latin was used predominantly in the church. The word Lucifer was used, and it was used to refer to Jesus in hymns. I have documented, I have the hymns printed in Latin, and in one point it even says Lucifer, our Christ, in the 3rd century. So I've looked at how do we start calling Lucifer Satan, and it started with Eusephorus in the Greek Septuagint, and then Jerome didn't know how to transfer Hallel because it was the only place it was ever used, and they were trying to figure out, what does this Hallel mean? What does this word mean? And Jerome just he just transliterated from the Septuagint because he didn't know how to translate it. Well, when the King James translators came along, they knew that was a reference to the devil, and common usage at that point, by that time, Lucifer was known as the devil. That was his name, and common man. So they put word Lucifer in there to identify that this was who it was talking about. It was talking about the archenemy of God. Well, now along comes the ESV changing that to day star, the NIV changing that to morning star. And I about lost my mind when I saw that the archenemy of God was called the morning star or a day star. And then I find out that the word Lucifer means the same.
Mm.
So my thought, and I'm just throwing this out here.
Yeah.
I'm wondering so what we do sometimes, we use Genesis 3 and say Satan from the very beginning wants to mess with God's words, right? You've
Yep.
heard that argument,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So then we jump to 1881 and we assume that from Genesis 3 to 1881, he wasn't messing around much.
Hmm.
Or until he gets to the uncials in Alexandria. In Alexandria, he starts messing with the text. Well, what about pre-Alexandria? What
Right.
about from Genesis 3 to Alexandria? Where did he get? And all of a sudden I begin to wonder, did old Scratch steal the name Lucifer for himself pre all of this stuff?
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's interesting.
And did he jump in the text and put his name in there and then laugh all the way out, and then watched us fight over it and then trying to stick that name with him and keep him calling him light bearer? And then I thought about all the doctrines about the devil that have been created over the idea that he was at one time a light bearer, and realized that the Bible never said that anywhere.
So that's interesting because what you're claiming here is that the King James Version had propagated the use of Lucifer for Satan, and is it wrongly? Like, are you wrongly
What
suggesting
I
that
no,
wrongly?
I'm not saying that at that time. What I'm going to suggest, and this again, this is this is my understanding and my belief,
Yeah,
that the King James used what we would call now a dynamic equivalent.
right.
That Lucifer was a dynamic equivalent, that it was appropriate for the time and place, and that even today we understand it to be the devil. The world does. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad translation, but I'm going to tell you it's a dynamic equivalent.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's not
100% believe
surprising
that.
either that there are dynamic equivalents in the KJV, right? I
Well,
mean, the
I
most
believe the word church is a dynamic equivalent.
Yeah, or God forbid, right? In Romans, pick your chapter, right? Migenito, God forbid. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
That's an interesting little theory you got there. Very interesting. Let's kind of come back a little bit. I want to go back to the time when you received the initial communication from the KJBRC, that they wanted you to resign. So you did not necessarily resign of your own accord, but you were asked to resign. You weren't kicked off, but you were asked to resign. When you got that initial communication, what went through you? Like, what were you thinking? How were you feeling about that?
I was greatly disappointed because I felt like we were at a place where I felt like the KJBRC was going to be considered an academic option. The guys were, okay, we're not rabid Ruckmanites. We actually sit down and talk about the issues. We trust the King James. We believe it's faithful and accurate, but we're willing to discuss anything. Let truth stand on its own. I felt like we were starting, younger guys that were questioning the text
Mm.
were starting to say, "Oh, I'm interested in this KJBRC thing. What's this about? This sounds like a position I could support." It's not KJB preferred. It's more of a KJB trusted.
Mm.
And we can use it as a guide. And boy, those guys got it right. That they weren't perfect, but they did the best job of anybody. And that's what I was starting to hear back. I was
Right.
starting to hear back, and let's stop calling each other heretics.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Let's stop comparing ourselves among ourselves. Let's actually have real honest conversations. And I felt we were at that point. And when they asked me to resign, I felt betrayed a bit, and I felt like, okay, this is going to kick us back a little bit. We're
Yeah.
going to lose ground here
Hmm.
on this whole argument, this whole discussion. I was willing to do it, but then I felt like some of those guys on the KJBRC were starting to lean stronger towards Ruckmanism, and we're refusing to admit it, because all of a sudden the rhetoric started coming back at me like every word is perfect in the King James. Well, here's something that a lot of people don't know. So from 1611 to say 1796, the italicized words alone in the King James have changed 81%. So to say that we can't update it, we can't touch it, well, which one are we going to say we can't touch or we can't update? 81% changes in the King James Bible from 1611 to 1796. And those are
Right.
Brian Ross's numbers. In 1776, the American printers started printing the King James using Americanized language. So if you get anything post 1776 that was printed in America and you compare that to, say, Cambridge or Oxford text, you're going to find things like thoroughly is changed to thoroughly.
Hmm.
and other type changes. So when you say every word is thoroughly perfect or is thoroughly perfect? And I think the PR rhetoric is disingenuous. What we say to the masses is don't change a word when words have been changed since 1611.
That's interesting you point that out because I have a Cambridge Clarion. It's a King James version. It's on my nightstand. Typically, what I read before I go to bed, right? And 1 John 3:16 is really kind of popular, especially amongst those who think the New King James Version is a terrible translation because it's not in the NKJV. But in the KJV, in the original, it's in there. That's the love of God. For this we know the love of God. Of God is not in the New King James, but it's in the original KJV 1611. But in this Cambridge Clarion I have, it's in italics. And so when you look at the editions of the Textus Receptus, in fact, most editions of the Textus Receptus have it in italics, and then there's maybe 4 or 5 that don't. A couple of Beza's editions and in Stephanus's 1550, I think, it's a marginal note. It's interesting that there have been those kind of updates to the KJV. With that being said, let's talk about the New King James Version. So I use the New King James Version. I preach from it. I teach from it. Why not just use the New King James Version? Why not just parade that as a really good, reliable edition of the Textus Receptus for the New Testament anyway?
Well, when it first came out, I was prepared to do that. I was in my teens, I think, and my father was a pastor, and we looked at the New King James and we thought, okay, maybe this is the option. This is what we're looking for. We got into it and we found out that some of the New King James translations, and I can't remember off the top of my head all of them, but I remember a couple of things. One is they would use words that were less understandable sometimes than the Old English. For example, in Daniel, where it changes presidents and princes to satraps. It's
Right.
like, so you're not really helping the issue. So if I'm changing to the New King James, I'm changing because I want more understandable words, not more collegiate words. That was one of the problems. The other problem is, and they did that a lot. They would use words that were appropriate. They were different words, but they were words that weren't in common use and people didn't understand them, like satraps, for example. Then the other thing is that there were times in the New King James where they would follow, it seemed like they followed critical text readings. Hebrews 3:16, for example. I believe that's one, you could look it up, where the critical text changes that into a question, which flips the
Right.
meaning of the verse, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I believe the NKJV, I believe, I have to go look for sure, but I believe they followed and there were places that off the top of my head, I can't remember, they would follow the critical text. So we get back to the problem of who do you trust? If they're using that there, what if they're using it in another place and I didn't catch it? Why are they letting the critical text creep in any place? Does that make sense?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so,
No, I get it. My initial response would be, well, some of those aren't really, but we won't go into that. I just want your opinion here, so I'm not going to
right.
offer pushback
And
to
I'm
that
okay
part.
with having that conversation another
Yeah,
time because
that's right.
I would like to hear what you have to say. But
Yeah.
there are times and places where I think they followed a different reading that made the text look a little different and made it say something a little different than the original understanding. And I also think that they didn't get the poetic flow that the King James had, and it was like to quote Bishop, was it Wadsworth, when he looked at the RV, he said, it's like going from a well-oiled carriage to a wagon truck going over a corduroy road. It
Right,
felt
right.
kind of that way for me.
Okay.
So,
Okay. So let's go back to the King James Bible Research Council. Now, we had mentioned briefly, or you had mentioned briefly about the propensity. I'll use my own words, and then you can tell me if I'm right here. But the propensity of groups like the King James Bible Research Council to kind of distance themselves from people like Ruckman and Riplinger. Is that what you would see as happening with the KJBRC?
yeah, they definitely don't want to be Ruckmanites or Riplingerites. They distance themselves from both because they understand people that are, well, we would call them Ruckmanites, people that believe that the King James Bible is the inspired Bible for the world, that.
Mhm.
And we were very specific that we believe it's a faithful and accurate translation of the inspired scriptures, that it was not double inspired or re-inspired or anything like that. And they continue to say they hold that position theologically. My problem and my breakdown, not just with the KJBRC, but with any organization like this, I've often seen this happen, is there seems to be a disconnect between your theology and your practical application of the theology.
Right. And that's interesting because the reason I bring that up is because um, I I typically don't follow the King James Bible Research Council. I had to make a video where I cut every time I say King James Bible Research Council and just splice it all together in a 10-minute clip. Dwayne says King James Bible Research Council. No, but
Uh-huh.
I don't typically deal with them. I don't usually don't watch much of their material unless something like super interesting comes up. And so the times where I have had a chance to review some of their things, just recently was one that claimed that P52, which is our oldest New Testament manuscript, right, John Ryland's papyri, contains a passage in John 17 or 18, I can never remember. It's a discussion with Jesus and Pontius Pilate. And so who was that? I can't remember who it was now, the name. It wasn't Dr. David
Combs, I
Brown.
think. Combs
What's
is
that?
the one I think that
Combs,
Steve
yes, Dr.
Combs.
Combs. Yeah, and so he suggested in a little clip that P52 was supported by the Textus Receptus. And then he mentioned a few other papyri, which I haven't had a chance to look at. But when you review P52, that's just a flat out wrong statement. There's so many reasons why the Textus Receptus isn't supported in P52. And it was such a weird statement because as a King James Bible person, they typically don't rely on the papyrus manuscripts. And I would see the papyrus manuscripts as something that is neat and interesting and worth study, but probably not the greatest representative of the original. So why he would make such a claim is surprising. The reason I bring this up is because it just shows that some of the research that's thrown into some of their presentations is just not good. The last video I reviewed, a 3-hour long live stream on the King James, the New King James, and why it's a dangerous, and whether you believe it's a dangerous translation or not. Some of the facts and figures that he used throughout the presentation were just straight up wrong. And his Greek was questionable in a few situations. It's good that the King James Bible Research Council is stepping away from Riplinger and Ruckmanism, but some of those claims that they're making are really doing damage to their credibility as far
Right,
as research is concerned. And being called a research council, that would be
right.
kind of important. So, from your perspective, what do you think needs to change in the King James Bible Research Council in order for it to actually take hold as like a scholarly option, like you were talking about earlier?
Well, my challenge in-house while I was still on the board was for them to do better research. I did send an email to them, and some guys were offended by my comments
Mm,
because, some of these guys have done a lot of work. They've done a lot of writing and they've done a lot of research. Some of them, some of their research, and I could name some names, is really, really intense, and they've gone to great lengths. Some of them, their research is like, I have to say, there are times when my research was reading David Otis Fuller, and I didn't realize, and I would quote him and did not know that I trusted him, right? And I didn't know that he had done this. And when I call that out and say, guys, better be careful, then the response to me is, you're going against David Otis Fuller. Who are you to think you can go against him?
mm,
Well, this isn't about a personality. It's not about who's got a prettier brain. It's not anything about that. It's about, okay, so this was disingenuous and he's imperfect, and I appreciate the body of his work, but this was wrong. And I think the inability really to actually, be honest about, look, the King James Bible translators were good. Things they did were genius. One of the things that they did was they had people that were literary critics come in and listen to a reading of the King James. And they would say, well, that doesn't read right. Change the words to say it this way. That's how it got so poetic. And that's why it was so accepted for 400 years. But being honest about that, some of the conversations we have in closed meetings, they would agree with some of the things you and I have said,
right.
but they won't say that from the pulpit.
Mm,
Because if you say it from the pulpit, then you got all these people telling you you're not a Bible believer and they're canceling your meetings and you're a heretic and all this kind of stuff. And how could they do better? I think by letting the truth take them where it goes
mm,
and stop retreading old sermons and preaching the same thing over and over
mm,
again. Listen to guys that have, I mean, shoot, take Wes Huff, for example. Okay, Wes Huff may not be where I'm at with the Bible, but the guy's an expert in ancient documents, right? So that's his expertise. Well, let's see what he brings to the table. Let's listen to what he has to say and be respectful of it. I would say that would be better than using a Ruckman style approach. And here's what typical King James guys do. The NKJV is trash because it was wrong in this verse.
mm,
Well, I think that's a mistake. And I think that's the same mistake we follow when we say the streams. We say, well, there's these streams of bad Bibles. And so we pile all these Bibles in these bad streams. Well, the discussion is a lot more complex than that. And I think we need to be honest about that. That, yeah, this translation got really royally messed up in these areas. But to say the ESV is trash is a horrible mistake. Even saying the NKJV is trash, to throw that in the trash pile is, I mean, come on. There are things in it, honestly, in some of the new Bibles that do read correctly, faithfully, and accurately, and more understandably. But then there are places where they brought in critical text readings that I think were wrong. And the truth is, the general populace won't even notice those differences.
no. Okay, well let's finish up here. Let's say just parade venture. I like to use that word. It's a good King James Version word.
Yeah, it
Parade
is.
venture. Parade venture, the KJV Bible Research Council should send you an email or get in touch with you and say, Dr. Dan, we would like you to come back to the Research Council. Would you be willing to join us? Would you go back, or have the ties been cut completely?
I don't know the answer to that. It would have to depend. Uh, it would depend on if we're going to go towards, if they're going to go towards Ruckmanism, or if they're going to, it depends on what they decide they're going to do. Are they gonna double down and say there is no need for an update? Every word is perfect and pure. Don't change a word. If they're going to double down on that and say that it's wicked to change a word in the KJV, if they double down on that, then I won't have anything to do with them because it's disingenuous and dishonest.
Right, right.
So it depends really on where they go. And I'm sitting here kind of watching to see what happens. If they admit, look, we stepped in it a little bit, we made a statement here, because I've done that before. I
Sure.
made a statement that wasn't well researched and it was
Mhm.
wrong, but I'll admit it. If they'll do that, say, okay, so I was wrong about that. Okay. Everybody makes mistakes. I've known these guys to be good men, sincere men. I've known them to be friends. This whole thing and our separation division kind of shocked me, to be
Yeah.
quite honest with you, because I knew them to be honest Bible students. But of late, it feels like they're shifting a different direction. And I think some of them are trying not to. There are guys on that board that are translating the Bible into other languages, and they know how languages work. They're not stupid. These guys are smart guys.
Mhm.
So some of it's confusing to me, to be quite honest with you.
Well, I'll give you the last word here. So, is there anything that you would like to say to the King James Bible Research Council, or any suggestions, or anything, just anything that you would like to say, given everything that's happened?
Specifically addressing the council or specifically addressing the King James issue?
The council.
Oh, wow. That caught me off guard a little bit. I would say that I appreciate the books, the research, the good, solid research that's been done by the council. I appreciate that. I use it still. It's the KJBRC has some good resources, and I will continue to use their resources. I think that the Dean Burgon Society as well had some great material. That material I think is useful in any library, but I would challenge them to listen to their critics and to rethink some of the things they're saying and make sure their theology matches the practical application of it. Either every word is perfect and unchangeable, or this is a faithful and accurate translation of the inspired scriptures. Both things are not true.
Well, Dr. Haifley, I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me here. It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure we'll be in touch over the coming days and months and all that kind of good stuff. Anyway, I really do appreciate your time, so thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be with you. God bless you.
All right, brothers and sisters, until next time, we'll see you around.